It's another edition of Musical Shenanigans. Here it is, show number 5. We're having informative, in-depth, profound talks about the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, Led Zeppelin, and Bob Dylan. Be sure to stick around for an a cappella birthday tribute to Robert Zimmerman with Cory, Dave, Scott, and your mom. Welcome back to Musical Shenanigans. This is Cory.
And this is Dave.
And this is Scott.
All right, and we're taking on the last of the top 500 Rolling Stone artists that had 5 or more albums on the list. And this is the last time we're doing anything this big.
Yeah, that was it was bad last week. It was a little bit better this week because at least we didn't have Kanye, but it was still 24 albums and grueling experiment.
But that was 8 Bob Dylan albums. It's almost too much.
Yeah, getting ahead of ourselves.
Yes, I will agree. I was told last time after doing 6 Kanye albums, that kind of torture falls under the Geneva Convention.
Yeah.
So we will not put ourselves through that again.
No, we shan't.
But let's start again with the easy one, the Rolling Stones.
What can you say that hasn't been said? We talked about the Beatles last week. There was always this perpetual Beatles versus Stones thing. Who was the greatest band of that sort of British invasion? I don't want to get too much into that, but I think that's kind of not really an apples to apples comparison, because I honestly think that the Beatles and Stones were doing 2 different things. But with the Stones in particular, I think their sort of biggest takeaway is just the contribution they had to American music, because they were really sort of co-opting a lot of blues and jazz and gospel and tying it all together and packaging it in a way that turned American ears onto it, to people who hadn't listened to that music before.
They basically reintroduced our music to us again.
I think it was Muddy Waters that I read said that the Stones had such an impact on sort of Americans becoming aware of blues music again, that every time a Stones album came out, he would see his back catalog sales go up, because it would sort of like pique this interest and people would go out and buy blues records again.
And yeah, like you said, Dave, they did reintroduce a lot of stuff to us. In fact, yeah, 2 of these bands, the Stones and Zeppelin, there was that whole blues influence. And it seems like a lot of British guitarists, or a lot of British bands rather, were extremely influenced by the American blues. So, you had, Clapton, of course, Page, Beck, all those guys. And then, of course, Keith.
And I think that, and I mentioned the Beatles versus Stones debate, and I honestly think that's part of where that came from. Scott, you're right. Like, when all of these bands started, they all kind of started with that common theme of taking American blues and redoing it. And so you can compare like early Beatles to early Stones, but then from that point, that when I say it's apples and oranges, from that point forward, they kind of both went in 2 opposite directions. And it's you get a few years into the 60s, and it's not even a fair comparison anymore.
No, it really isn't.
The Stones, like a lot of other bands from that time, they're like gateway bands. You listen to them, and then you start going through the Muddy Waters reference you gave. You start going through the backlogs of like, oh, they're covering this band. Who is this? Who are they covering? Yeah. But I mean, say what you will about them, they've withstood the test of time.
Absolutely.
They still sell out stadiums.
It's not even a question of withstanding the test of time. It's a question of like they're still sort of the same hot act they were 40 years ago.
They're as iconic as ever.
And Mick Jagger picked up his stage presence from James Brown.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Little Richard.
And that's why people go to see them. It's the theatrics. I mean, Mick Jagger is a lead singer. He is that definition, I think, that all other lead singers have taken from.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the energy that guy brings to the stage. I mean, even if the singing wasn't there, just the boundless energy. I mean, you watch Jagger moving and dancing and singing around. The guy's 77 years old. He moves a hell of a lot better than me. I haven't even hit 50 yet, so.
I do not have moves like Jagger.
No.
That is a fact.
No, I do not either. And, not that we'll beat the point. Keith is amazing. I mean, the musicianship in this band.
Oh, absolutely.
I'll rave about Charlie Watts. The guy is the definitive pocket.
Yeah.
There's nothing like overly complicated about what he does, but try to reproduce it. He's just got a smooth groove that just holds down each of their songs.
Now, Jagger, Richards, and Watts, the only 3 members of that band to appear on every single studio album.
That's right, because Ron Wood didn't get there until until 75.
Yep.
Brian Jones managed to die.
27 Club.
Yep, absolutely.
And then Wyman left. He's the oldest. He's actually 84 years old.
Holy shit.
Yeah, and Charlie Watts will be 80 in June.
I didn't even realize that.
And honestly, if I told you right now that they were launching a big 200-date tour for next year, you wouldn't be surprised.
No.
Even in their 70s and 80s, because again, that's just that incredible energy that those guys have for putting on a show.
It'd be a case of, it's the Stones going on tour again.
I think we have to talk about with the Stones is the drug usage, right? Because there's a whole history there, not just with Keith, but also with Brian Jones.
Oh, yeah.
And, one of the things that I was reading was talking about those last couple albums that Jones was on. In a weird way, his drug use kind of drove the sound, because he was getting into all sort of things that don't seem quite as weird now, but at the time were really strange, like sitars and auto harps and whatever. And he would just come into the studio. If he showed up at all, he would come in completely baked. He would be laser focused on, this is the instrument I want to record today. And they would say okay, well, Brian, we don't actually have any songs that have that instrument on. No, this is what I'm recording today. And he would go into a studio and he would just make stuff up on whatever weird instrument he was into that week. And then they had to work around that by figuring out, how are we going to now incorporate that into these other songs that we've been working on. In a strange way, he was driving some of their experimentation, because he was so coked out of his mind and stoned out of his mind all the time that he was insistent on playing these instruments whether they wanted to or not.
Ah, yes. Drugs and rock and roll.
Can't have one without the other.
You certainly cannot.
All right, the albums. I'm good with most of them. I would have liked to have seen Tattoo You on there, or Undercover from their 80s.
I will tell you, I'm not sure that there was really anything missed here on the Rolling Stones list. I was kind of coming into this, I went back and looked at the rest of their discography and kind of refreshed my memory about what was out there. And when you look at their other albums, that seems to be a common pattern. There was one big single and then a lot of filler that never really went anywhere. The albums that Rolling Stone focused on, Rolling Stone magazine that is, focused on, were more albums where you had just a much larger body of work that sort of became like their calling card, if you will, like more songs that really hit it big and that you really associate with the act.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I mean, I didn't really feel like they missed too many albums on this list. What Cory said about Tattoo You, I feel like that was a representative phase. Perhaps some of their stuff should have been represented, and you have all this iconic work, and then you've got this stuff with 2 or 3 songs here and there.
So, Rolling Stones absolutely belong in the top 500. Next on our list, Bruce Springsteen.
Bruce!
There's a constant about Bruce. He wavers in and out of what he does, but kind of like the Rolling Stones, he comes back. He always comes back to that just one definitive sound that's him. He understands how a band should sound, amazing lyricist, and a solid body of work here, I feel, that's been captured.
Yeah, we're talking about Springsteen and Dylan this week, and I honestly think they're probably the two biggest sort of poets in rock music, honestly. Just amazing. Well, we'll get to Dylan in a second, so I'll hold my thoughts on that, but just really, in both cases, a really impressive command of the English language. Springsteen in particular really knows how to tell a story. He could probably sit down and write an opera, honestly, just because he's so good at sort of crafting a narrative with his lyrics.
And I listened to the audiobook he did, Born to Run. He was the narrator. It was like having a conversation with the guy, the way he just told these stories. I highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to, if you haven't watched it yet, Springsteen on Broadway, which I think is probably still out there on Netflix. It's basically Springsteen doing stripped down acoustic versions of basically his whole catalog of hits with really engaging narrative between the songs. I honestly, he could have not sang it. He could have just come out and told the stories that he told, and I would have been hooked anyway. And you learn a lot more about who he really is when you hear him talk on that Broadway show.
Now, he is the voice and the advocate, I feel, for middle-class America.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say, the voice of middle-class America.
A voice.
Perhaps he's a little bougie for all that. Anyway, no, I think though that Springsteen was very underrated as a guitar player too.
Absolutely.
You don't hear a lot of talk about him as the musician, Bruce Springsteen. I mean, as the songwriter, yeah, great. He's fantastic. I agree. However, as a musician, I like him a whole lot better. I have a lot more respect in that department.
I mean, I totally agree with you. The guitar playing is fantastic. I don't know. I'm kind of with Cory on this Voice of Middle Class America thing. You know, there are a lot of songs, especially when you get into Born in the USA, that album, which is one of the ones that was on the list, and which is the single is probably like the most singularly misunderstood song in all of rock music. Like you get these like right-wing politicians playing at a political rallies, and in fact, when you listen closely to the lyrics, the song is actually about Vietnam vets who were just totally abandoned by their government when they came back. My Hometown, which is all about sort of the economic decline of the 80s and how trickle-down economics was actually killing all these small, what were previously thriving communities. So, Cory, I mean, I don't know. I'm more on your side about this with the sort of blue-collar, middle-class America.
He is definitely a force, at least from American music. And that's good because, honestly, America doesn't have a lot to offer.
And the one thing I did want to bring up is with some of these albums when he's playing with the E Street Band, they record live in the studio. Yeah, they might do extra, overdubs or this, that, and the other individually, but when they record as a band.
I was going to say, and he's such a perfectionist, too, about what happens in the studio.
I would have liked to have seen The River or The Rising also on this list.
I could make a case for other albums that maybe should have been here. You could make a case for Greetings from Asbury Park. There's a couple of songs out there that made it big growing up. Blinded by the Light, which, of course, Manfred Mann turned around and did. The Ghost of Tom Joad really didn't get a lot of publicity, but that album is great too.
And the current one, Letter to You, it came out after this list, but I don't think they would have considered it. I do want to, real quick, Nebraska. Yeah. What I really liked about it was this is something he recorded on a 4-track, and they just took that, did some final mixes, and that's what we wound up with, is that raw sound, and it goes with the lyrics, it goes with the whole theme.
It's a very somber album too, very stripped down, a lot of, again, back to these sort of blue collar stories. Also a lot of people that are like down on their luck, end of their rope kind of stories. The title track on that is about the true story of a 19-year-old in the 50s who went on a killing spree and killed 11 different people with his girlfriend. Like he and his girlfriend ran off together and killed 11 people. There's another song on the album it's a fictional work about a guy who loses his job in the mill, kills a night clerk at a liquor store, gets sentenced to life in prison, and his life is just turned to such shit, frankly, that he asked the judge, rather than life in prison, please just send me to the electric chair.
All right. So overall, we feel that Bruce needs to be represented in the top 500.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But, my real question is, what sort of cake would he eat? Would it be just a chocolate cake or...
I'm not picking him as a red velvet type.
Maybe a pineapple upside down cake, even. It's American. It's a little kitschy, It takes you back. Yeah, I'm thinking pineapple upside down.
I don't know. He's in his 70s. He could be gluten-free by now, for all we know.
No, I don't think so. He's born to run, man.
What kind of cake? I guess we got to add this to our list of questions for each artist. Scott, he pretty much determines his artist by A, whether they should be on a strapped to a rocket, or B, what kind of cake they eat.
Yes, what are the preferred baked goods.
All right, this now leads us up to Bob Dylan.
Yeah, because I kind of kicked this off with the last one, talking about Springsteen, that again, I think that if you put these two guys together, they're probably, in terms of the lyric writing, the two sort of greatest poets in pop music.
The Banana Man, yeah.
Yes, we're gonna get to the voice. We're gonna get to the voice.
Sorry.
But in terms of the lyric writing, the one thing that I think kind of says it all, Dylan, as far as I know, is the only guy on this list who actually won a Nobel Prize in literature for his lyrics. So
that's true.
So I'm not alone, I guess, in recognizing the lyrical talents. Now, I will say that Dylan is a lot more opaque. Like Springsteen, you can follow. He's telling a story. You know exactly what he's saying. You know what the meaning is. Dylan can be difficult to follow. He makes you work for it. Sometimes he's challenging you. Sometimes I think he's just playing around with no meaning at all, like just phrases that sounded good to him, sort of a Syd Barrett kind of thing. But yeah, again, his control of the English language is just phenomenal.
With Dylan, specifically about, you talk about the lyrics, Bruce Springsteen is much more accessible.
Yeah.
Whereas, like you were saying, Dylan, he does make you think. He does put things in a little more abstract sense, and that's just writing style, and I can appreciate him for that, absolutely. Also, the fact that he's been around as long as he has and has such a massive catalog. Didn't he also recently make his catalog public domain?
He did. He sold it. He sold his catalog.
That's right. That's right.
I'm wondering if this is not a direct relation to what occurred with Tom Petty. That he just left the control. He went, look, you can all have this, do with it what you want, and my kids have nothing to do with it. I'll take the money and I'll just disperse it to them. End of story.
Right.
Yeah, the Tom Petty experience, I think, has replayed itself many times. I think Prince, his family members had some similar fights over what was going to get released. And actually, you mentioned James Brown earlier. I think it happened with James Brown, too.
One of the first notes I made is that Dylan's very reminiscent of reading Jack Kerouac. And I was like, it feels like the Beat Poets inspired him. Well, the other day, I watched on Netflix the Rolling Thunder Review. And the movie opens and you see Allen Ginsberg with Bob Dylan. Later in the movie, he talks about how he was given a copy of Kerouac's Mexico City Blues in 1958 and just completely devoured it, a book of poems.
Wow, spot on.
I kind of refer to Dylan as the original rapper. He understands the rhyme, the cadence, and where to find the emphasis in the words.
Yeah, well, that kind of brings us back to the voice thing, right? Because, I mean, some of those early albums are essentially spoken word. I don't know, we spent some time on the last show talking about Neil Young and how his voice was kind of annoying and we had a hard time dealing with it. So it might seem a little hypocritical now that I'm going to come out and defend Bob Dylan's voice. It doesn't always work, but it works more often than it does for Neil Young. He had such a keen sense of music and such a keen ear. He recognizes that the voice is just sort of another instrument in the band, and sometimes you want it to have a certain sound and timbre to it. And honestly, I think he writes his songs knowing what he's working with. I mean, if you think about once upon a time, you looked so fine, through the bums of dime in your prime. Can you imagine that line being sung by anybody other than Bob Dylan?
No, not at all.
Whereas Neil Young is just doing the same damn voice over and over again.
Yeah, that's true. I will say this, as much as I don't have a problem with it, I think our theme, the motif for the past couple of weeks, should be everything in moderation, because I like Bob Dylan, but I don't want 6 to 8 albums of Bob Dylan in one.
No, that was too much.
2-week period.
Yeah, I agree.
It was just too much. And honestly, I feel like he's more a Spice Cake kind of guy.
You know, and after Neil Young in this, I mean, really, it was way too much Neil and Bob, even for my own liking. So, yeah, we're not doing this again. Dylan is a huge inspiration. We go back, we just had Bruce Springsteen, highly influenced by Dylan. Hendrix loved him. There's a live version of Hendrix doing Like a Rolling Stone. He absolutely loved Dylan. And, I mean, he indirectly inspired Judas Priest.
Well, you know, Dylan certainly deserves to be on the list.
Yes.
And I'm not even going to debate the albums. It's just like, yeah, okay, fine. I don't know about 8 of them, though. But then again, like I said, the guy has a massive catalog. Of course, there's going to be a bunch in there. It's like the Stones.
Yeah, I think there's some. I mean, there are definitely some that could come off there. I think the Basement Tapes is overrated. It was. I understand why it drew so much sort of focus. It was this tape that after he had a motorcycle crash in '66, he kind of holed up for a few years and went out of the public eye and put together this band, and they literally just recorded a bunch of stuff they liked. Arguably, it was more influential for what it wasn't than what it was. And what I mean by that is it wasn't protest music. It wasn't psychedelic rock, which was what was popular all over the place. It was just these old sort of like Americana standards that they put together. And the whole idea was they were putting together demos that they were then going to go out and give to record companies to try to get other artists to record those songs. So nobody was ever supposed to hear these tapes. They were demos for other artists to use. It's an important album, I guess, because the group of musicians that he pulled together to do that ultimately became the band.
Yeah. Some of his best stuff was covered by others, and that's how I know it.
I had higher expectations for Blonde on Blonde. It was not what I was hoping for.
We're gonna say, we're gonna I want my carrot cake too.
Oh, it's carrot cake.
Oh yeah, well no, carrot cake. Oh, did I say spice cake?
You said spice cake earlier, yeah.
Well, I think back then it was carrot cake, yeah.
Maybe it's hummingbird now, without the carrots in it.
Maybe so, yeah. He changes it up. Well, I'm sure as an older guy, he's had to change it up. He's got to have some roughage.
All right. Dylan belongs. Huge inspiration. I think we can move on. All right, it's time to talk about our new sponsor. Shaman Larry introduced me to a friend of his, Daryl, who runs the Bear Woods Resort and Spa. a luxurious paradise servicing all of your needs for meditation, relaxation, and finding your center again. A clothing-frowned resort to unwind, offering deep tissue massage, dermabrasions, waxing, aromatherapy, outdoor sports, and steam baths. Book your day or weekend retreat now with Bearwoods Resort and Spa. Be sure to tell Daryl that we sent you. All right, gents, I know Daryl reached out, and we all got to go down there and check it out.
Well, that was interesting, I gotta say. You know, I really wasn't expecting... There weren't a lot of ladies... I didn't see any ladies the whole time I was there.
I failed to mention that. I didn't want to taint you with that information.
Yeah. I had a massage and some waxing done, because I was telling Bruce, the guy who was doing the massage for me, you know, about the anal bleaching stone. So they introduced me to waxing. And now, Cory, I got to tell you, you didn't warn me about the waxing part where they pour the wax down the crack and
they're thorough.
Literally, it tears you a new asshole.
So it was quite an experience, is what you're saying.
It was, but it did leave me feeling very different afterwards. So yeah, interesting place. I would recommend it to everyone, sure. But, you know, if you're going down there for the ladies, you might have to go off property.
Yeah, it was a little... I mean, it was a little uncomfortable, honestly, just being at a clothing-optional resort to begin with. But then, I don't know, it's when you find out that it's all men, I honestly don't know if that made it more comfortable or less comfortable. I mean, on the one hand, you're not really quite so worried about who you're impressing, I guess. I mean, it was a nice resort. I don't get me wrong, it was a nice resort. I mean, they had 3 separate pools. They had a freshwater pool, they had a saltwater pool. They had one that was all Purell, which was a nice thing, especially after COVID, and had a lot of fun on the shooting starfish zip line. That was nice. And then, I went to the spa too, by the way, Scott, and I mean, if you're like me, the last 14 months of COVID, the personal grooming maybe hasn't been your biggest priority. So I went in there and they kind of helped me out, gave me a couple of options. I never knew there were so many options, honestly. Trim things and clean up down there. Of course, everybody's familiar with the Brazilian, but they had a whole just menu of options. They had Chewbacca with a crew cut. They had the naked mole rat. You could get the mossy truffle. They had the Abe Lincoln. You could do the pointy Shakespeare beard, the Groucho Marx novelty glasses. If you like a clean look, they can do the Sinead. If you want a little color, they can do the Billie Eilish. If you're into country, they can do the Billy Ray Cyrus mullet.
How did you get all these options? I was not given a menu. I don't think Scott was either.
No, they just gave me the Lonely Fireman. That's what they got me. You know, I was like, okay, I'll take that. I didn't see this giant menu.
No.
Yeah,
wow.
We went in and we both got like the full waxing, and like Ramon that was like doing mine. He's like, all right, now you now have the exposed gnome in the rock garden. He goes, oh, but if your parents had a different, religious preference, you would have been the cobra in the rock garden. Yeah, I was completely surprised.
I remember seeing those, but I don't know why you guys didn't get the full menu.
Yeah, they went for the full Bob Geldof with us.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Now they did offer me. I'm not a big superhero guy, but they did offer me the Wolverine sideburn. I came home with the Caribbean cornrows.
That's very festive.
Yeah, I don't know why, because I have to say most people got the same thing Scott and I got. Because later when I was out playing like croquet and shuffleboard, there were a lot less buffalo shots in your peripheral, which was nice not to have, especially when you're all out there like that. Now, I mean, when I got there, I was given a nice fruit cup and some yogurt. Very health conscious. I was, I took a walk to the butterfly garden with some of the other early risers that were there. I got the massage, and I will say, when they did the full waxing, to properly distract you, I got one of their botanical facials at the same time.
Nice.
You got a facial? Wow.
And I have to say, my face is much brighter. I had some like adult acne coming in. That's all gone now.
That's amazing.
It was a really great experience. I feel rejuvenated. And yeah, you know what, folks? Give him a call. Let Daryl know we sent you. Not more I can say. And you know what? Make sure you do get the menu options. You don't get stripped down like Scott and I did.
Yeah, I feel like I need to go back and check that out now.
Well, it'll be a while before I can go back.
Well, that same here. But...
strip mining, what I went through.
Yeah.
Bearwood Resort and Spa. Book your day or weekend retreat now. Let's get back to our show. And to end this whole series, we'll go with also an easy one. Yes, Zeppelin. All right, Scott.
Yeah, they were fun. Again, I think they're more of a chantilly cake because they were really flourishy and flashy. So you've got that, little bit of flair on top, kind of like precursor to Queen, maybe a little bit too. But one of the progenitors of heavy metal. Yeah, I think all their albums deserve to be on the list. I think they should have been higher up.
Yes.
But that's just personal opinion. I think Led Zeppelin 3 is missing. I think Page and Jones, and Bonham too for that matter. Just as a band, they were very underrated for their instruments. And it's funny because Page was so long known as a session musician from the early 60s on. What else can you say about Zeppelin? They're innovators.
Absolutely. I go back to what we talked about with the Stones earlier, the Stones, the Beatles, all those initial British invasion bands. Scott, you made the point that they were all rooted in American blues.
Yeah.
You're right. Zeppelin gets a lot of credit for being the progenitors of heavy metal. But when you listen to those, like Led Zeppelin 1 and Led Zeppelin 2, especially those first couple of albums, they're doing blues music.
Yeah, that was straight.
They've added a ton of distortion. They've reworked a couple of bits here and there, but they're doing blues music. Whole Lot of Love. The lyrics actually came from a blues song. They actually got sued. Dazed and Confused was originally a blues tune that Page did with the Yardbirds. Then you get to taking Dazed and Confused, turning it into a 30-minute jam session where Page eventually breaks down and picks up a violin bow and starts playing his guitar with a violin bow.
Check out Dazed and Confused, the version like you mentioned with the Yardbirds, because it's so freaking different from the one where he's using the bow and where he's got the theremin and everything else, and it's like, oh wow, talk about experimental. So he was just a master of that experimental type sound and always kind of trying to push the limits of what he could do, because the technology back then it wasn't digital.
Yeah, but I mean, even with what he was working with it, so that's the thing that I think Page doesn't get enough credit for. I think he was really the creative force behind that band, not just in terms of songwriting, but also just in terms of the use of the studio and trying new things in the studio. A Whole Lot of Love, What Is and What Should Never Be. If you've never listened to those tracks through a good set of headphones, fix that. Just listen to the sound panning around in your head.
I would recommend that very approach to every album on this list. You miss so much.
I have a very vivid memory of being chemically induced and having headphones on and listening to In the Evening. And something about that song just clicked with those chemicals quite well. quite well. But Zeppelin, I mean, if we look at like the tree of like rock and roll and all of its roots and blues and jazz and gospel, and I mean, I'd throw in the beat poets too.
Sure.
We kind of climb up that tree. It's like we've got the early Chuck Berry, Little Richard, then on to Elvis, Beatles, Stones, Yardbirds, Cream, the whole Southern California thing with the Beach Boys and the Byrds, and then also include Dylan and Joni Mitchell and all those. And Led Zeppelin just took all of that and went, okay, we can do this. There is a piece of everything in their catalog. It is intertwined. I mean, that's why their music is unique to them. And to me, it's every single member of that band is a lead player.
Oh, yeah.
You think of some of their songs and you'll associate the bass line. You won't necessarily think of like the guitar riff. And then, of course, John Bonham. I'll just start fangirling over him. I mean, it's kind of like Neil Peart in some ways. People will play those drum lines on their steering wheels because they know them.
There aren't a ton of songs that are driven forward by the drum line, in the sense that like you can't imagine hearing the song without the drum pattern, but like Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll. That like drum it.
The opening and the closing. I mean, he bookend that. I mean, another perfect song.
Yeah, that song would not work without Bonham's playing.
No.
Yeah, and that whole album is just so amazing because they recorded it so quickly on the Rolling Stones mobile studio at Headley Grange when Fleetwood Mac had just finished up doing the same thing at the same place. And I think they said Rock and Roll was the song they recorded in like 15 minutes. Just boom, one take, done.
Back to sort of like Page being so creative with his recording skills and studio skills, they borrowed that van on Physical Graffiti. There's a couple of songs where they recorded literally out in the garden because they just wanted to hear some outdoor sounds in the background. And Black Country Woman, they're recording outside, and just as they're getting ready to start, a plane flies overhead. And like we hear one of the guys saying, "Oh no, wait till the plane's gone. And you hear Jimmy Page going, no, leave it. It sounds great. So they deliberately left the plane in the background.
Yeah, I mean, much like the Beatles, they accomplished a lot in a very short amount of time.
Yes.
And it stands the test of time. Now, of course, there's how many re-releases of every album and how many box sets. Jimmy Page is as bad as George Lucas. He just can't leave well enough alone. Or it's just another reason to bilk the fans.
Well, he's got to make some money.
And
he's got a very young wife.
Yes. Yeah, we won't go into that. Wasn't he dating like the 16 or 17-year-old long ago?
Well, he's married to I think she's 20 or she's just into her 30s.
Yeah.
And he's almost 80. Like, damn, dude. Well, good for you, I guess.
and one note about Led Zeppelin 4, Fast Times at Ridgemont High. In the movie, Mike Damone tells Mark, make sure when you go out on your date, you put on side 2 of Led Zeppelin 4. They're riding in the car, and Kashmir comes on. I'm like, that's not on Zeppelin 4. So I went and looked it up, because Cameron Crowe wrote the script. So I'm thinking, Cameron Crowe's not going to fuck this up. And Amy Heckerling, the director, is certainly not going to screw this up either. They pretty much said is A, they couldn't get the rights to it, but B, more importantly, they just made it to where it's the kid's fault. He screwed it up. So the mistake was on purpose. But it was like a little Easter egg for all the Zeppelin fans out there that were irate like me going, that's not on that fucking album. Kashmir's on Physical Graffiti.
Kashmir's a brilliant song too.
It is.
One of my favorite recordings of that is with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and to hear Celebration Day, to the Rain song, Kashmir with oh wow, just gives you chills listening to that.
I feel that they should absolutely be in this list. I mean, inspired metal, but also prog rock.
Oh sure.
Oh yeah.
They took on those epic songs early. I still feel that they got dissed by, their highest ranking album was Led Zeppelin 4 at number 58. That album should have cracked the top 10. I'm sorry.
Easily, yeah.
Zeppelin should have been in the top 10.
Oh, and the Stones. One last note on the Stones. What sort of cake?
What's the kind of cake that's on the cover of Let It Bleed? Whatever that is.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
I know what you're talking about. That's a great album cover. It's like all these round things stacked up on a record turntable.
What's the cake? Is that like a cherry jubilee cake, a Black Forest thing? Maybe.
Well, I say that it's like a cake on top, and then it looks like a tire, and then it's got like a movie
a bicycle
reel.
wheel.
Yeah.
So it's not really a cake.
Well, no, it is a cake.
They took one of those old turntables where you could stack LPs on top of one another, and they drop down one at a time. And they just took a whole bunch of round things that were round and stacked up on the turntable.
Yeah.
And the top layer is actually a cake, and it's got little like figurines of the Stones playing in the center of the cake.
And actually, if you push them inside the cake, it'd be like the
a king cake.
The king cake.
New Orleans king cake, yeah.
Well, now I just, and in looking it up, they're calling it a birthday cake.
I'm going to say king cake. I'm going to go Rolling Stones king cake.
Yeah, honestly, if I'm picking pastries for the Stones, I don't they might not be cake guys. I think I got to go with hash brownies.
Okay, so Led Zeppelin, absolutely inspirational, top 500. And so we're going to stop this format immediately.
Hooray! Praise Satan!
No more 20-plus album conversations.
Yeah, we are going to go back to the 5 albums, and we'll be back next time with a little less album fatigue.
Squeals and feels!
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this highly intellectual podcast of musical shenanigans. Come back next time when we have our cake. And eat it too.
We gave you the jerk pork loin. The Kid and Play Philly cut was very popular, apparently. They have the fuzzy caterpillar. You can do the Charlie Chaplin mustache, the old-timey wax mustache, the John Waters mustache, or the Sam Elliott mustache. You can even do the Lemmy from Motorhead mustache as well.
Dave.
They had, I'm trying to think of them all. They had the silky corn cob, the fluffy llama, the Macy Gray. If you're into a retro look, they had the beanbag on a shag carpet. They had the Farrah, also, which is retro, kind of a feathered look with a lot of layers to it.
Dave.
The Jean Shalit, the Princess Leia. Oh, just in time for that Friends reunion that's coming up, they can do the Rachel.
Dave.
There's the Smoothie King, the Raccoon Bandit mask, the Soul Patch. The Veiny Rasputin, apparently, is highly recommended. They have the Highland Cow. The Bob Ross Happy Little Tree. There's the Man Bun, of course. The Defensive Porcupine. If you're into sort of a clean look, It's. I know it's amazing if you're into superheroes. Now they did offer me. I'm not a big superhero guy, but they did offer me the Wolverine sideburns.
Dave,
I turned them down on that. They also had the fuzzy unicorn, the goateed calamari.
Dave. Okay, thank you.